Comprehension with Sophia Taylor, Catherine Kelly, and Ariana Calder.
All right, so we are going to talk about our findings for our study in which we were looking into the effect of background music on reading comprehension. I'm Ariana Calder.
I'm Sophia Taylor.
And I'm Catherine Kelly.
We conducted this research last fall in our research methods psychology course.
All right, question. How many of you guys listen to music while you're studying or you're trying to get something done? Yeah, I see Liam does. Okay, yeah, pretty much everyone. Yeah, that's kind of what we thought going into this research, and we did some background research and found that that is generally true. According to this poll, 49% of, these are college students, listen to music regularly while they're studying, and 60% of those students who listen to music while they're studying claim that it helps them to focus better. And we colloquially believe this to be true, so it was in fact supported by previous research. Another show of hands, how many people are familiar with lo-fi music? Yeah, how many of you guys like to study to lo-fi music? Does anyone? Okay, yeah, you guys like to? Okay. So this has become increasingly popular for studying. As of last week, Lo-Fi Girls radio station, it's like music to relax and study to, has 668 million views. And I checked a couple minutes ago, there are like 3,000 people who are currently watching that live stream for lo-fi music to study to. So this has obviously grown in popularity, and there are a couple different reasons why. There are quite a few psychological claims surrounding whether or not lo-fi music is good to study to. Well, just to quickly define the genre, it is music that is played with like purposeful, misplayed notes, background music, environmental noise, things like static. And proponents for this music while studying or trying to get cognitive tasks done is that supposedly it can reduce stress, it will enhance your ability to focus on whatever task that you're doing. It supposedly reduces distractions, and there are some very broad claims for increased brain activity. When you look further into those claims, they don't generally talk about which brain areas could be active or to what degree they're more or less active. So we were curious to see if any of these claims had merit, and to see if lo-fi music was in fact better to study to.
So what we wanted to know was whether or not attention was disrupted by the presence of background music. For our purposes, attention and focus refer to the ability to successfully perform cognitive tasks. Reading comprehension is commonly used in previous research to assess cognition. In general, previous research suggests that participants perform better on cognitive tasks as opposed to when they are exposed to instrumental music. Previous research also indicates that participants perform better in silence as accompanied by music with lyrics. We hypothesized that music with lyrics would have a greater negative impact on reading comprehension than instrumental, or in our case, lo-fi music. We collected a total of 53 participants from the general psychology participant subject pool. We used the graduate management admissions test, also known as the GMAT, along with what we used music that was both lyrical and lo-fi. There were 3 room conditions, each one in a different room. One of the conditions was silent, which was our control group. Another room was lyrical music, and the third conditional room was our lo-fi music.
So just to go in more of our independent variables, just so you guys can hear what our participants heard. So the first room was silence while they worked on these GMAT tests, similar to a standardized test with reading passages on a variety of subjects. Like there was one about outer space, aquariums,
Undersea animals.
So variety of what did you get from this passage. And then our lo-fi music room had lo-fi versions of our lyrical music selections. So we tried to limit any confounds of using different. So for example, we used Dua Lipa's Don't Stop Now. So if you guys know that song, so that's a lo-fi version of the piece. And this is the traditional lyrical. So if you can imagine trying to read and answer questions about passages while listening to those, that's what our participants did. And just to go through what our procedure looked like, we assigned participants randomly to the level of music or silence. And then we had participants fill out an informed consent, so they knew what they were getting into and what they were about to do. Then we gave participants in each room 20 minutes to read these passages and answer the questions associated. Then after those 20 minutes, they were debriefed and given points for psychological credit in courses. So a brief statistics lesson before going into our results. So a p-value or probability value, it shows how likely is this result to occur if it was by chance. So our independent variable is how we manipulate our study if by chance those variables caused a significant result. And so as you can see on the right, if a p-value is lower than 0.05, it tends to be significant, saying this happened by chance with these variables that we assigned. So we used an analysis of variance test, or ANOVA, which when you have two or more groups, you will compare the means of these groups. So if they are significantly different, say if you had a score of 8 and then a score of 16, those are pretty different compared to a score of 8 and 9, for example. So our results, like I said, we performed a one-way between subjects ANOVA, so participants were only hearing their level of music, they only heard silence, or they only heard lyrical music during their test. And unfortunately, we did yield insignificant results, so there was not a big enough gap in our means. And as you can see in these tables, we did relationship tests of silence versus lo-fi, silence versus lyrics, silence versus music overall, and we did not get a 0.05 or less result. And then you can see below our means, they're all pretty similar, and those are means of incorrect answers. And then, oh my gosh, this is just a graph of showing our means and our error bars. You can see they're pretty big, unfortunately. But just an interesting aspect that we noticed, even though they were insignificant, the lo-fi listeners had the highest amount of incorrect answers. And so with that history lesson of lo-fi, how it's always said, study hard, listen to lo-fi, enhance brain activity, you know, our study kind of showed that they had more incorrect answers than other groups. And some limitations as to why we could have gotten our insignificant results was our sample size. We only had 53 participants, like we said, and of those participants, it was only UMW students, so a bit of a restricted sample size. And number of trials, as this was only a one-semester research project, we were only able to do 2 trials overall, so that's not many. And then the GMAT in general, we saw maybe 1 or 2 sources before our study used this standardized test, so not many people had used it and say to its success. And we just noted that future research could solve these limitations, you know, work to get a bigger sample size, in that sample size a wider range of participants, you know. And since most of these participants were college freshmen, their exposure to standardized testing like that, especially with COVID, could have also been a factor as to why. And yeah, that's all we have. Do you have any
How do you think like a larger sample size might like change the results at all?
So with a larger sample size, you're bound to get a wider variety of people with different education levels, different previous knowledge about what you're doing. And so I think a larger sample size, especially at UMW, maybe outside of just college freshmen and only college psychology freshmen, would have given us a bigger range of results, maybe significant. But it also would have made our means a bit more dispersed.
So did you have the same people testing mean silence and that same people testing what required? What do you think would happen if you had just one group of people that had taken scores and they took it once, twice, and 3 times?
We would be worried about them getting better at the test every time they took it. That was kind of why we ended up doing the between subjects ANOVA, because we did consider that. But we would be introducing this confounding variable of practice, which would influence their scores.
You mentioned that if you had ideal conditions, you would have more people, more participants. Do you think it's like logistically difficult to actually make that happen though, if you were to do this again sometime, because you're making everyone do a test multiple times?
So they don't do the test multiple times.
Sorry, different tests.
But they would only do the test one time. It would be logistically more difficult for us because we would have to find time in our day to post the experimental conditions. But I guess if that answers your question, we would have to do it more times.
But even here, if we conducted it at UMW again per se, it would be a larger sample of college students at predominantly female, predominantly white university, you know, so there's a lot of variables to consider if you're only conducting it at one university. Yeah.
If you could pick any other universities to conduct this test, where would you do that?
Any other universities? Do you guys have?
Maybe
Maybe a city campus?
yeah, maybe like a VCU.
Yeah, because I think
They have a pretty diverse student population.
Oh, yeah.
Or Mason, yeah, Mason.
Yeah. Okay, that's all. Thank you guys.